Welcome to Water Bottle Sessions. My name is Omar Fawzi, and I'm going to be your host for this podcast. A little bit about myself. I completed my master's degree in counseling psychology and later on completed my PhD in counselor education and supervision. Throughout my journey, I've had the opportunity to provide counseling services for the past 7 years. I have been able to teach for approximately 4 years in a master's program for students that are interested in counseling. And I've gotten to meet a lot of different people. Throughout this, I've learned the importance of perspective. I've learned the importance of being open-minded enough to create a space for people to share their opinions and perspectives. I'm really hoping that you'll go on this journey as we create this space for different peoples from different walks of life to share their opinions, to talk about their experiences, and how they ended up being who they are today. As I said, this is just simply a passion project of mine. I'm not going to be doing counseling. There's not going to be anything therapeutic in the traditional sense. However, if we can implore critical thinking, if we could show each other a little bit of empathy, and if we could just be willing to hear someone else's story, maybe we'll understand each other just a little bit more and be able to just explore new ideas and gain perspective from each other. So I hope you'll join me. And regardless of the platform in which you're listening to this, I hope you follow, I hope you subscribe, and please feel free to comment with ideas and different perspectives of your own. If you need to reach out, it's waterbottlesessions@gmail.com. I hope to hear from you, and I hope we all engage together as we go along this journey and listen to all these different stories. Thank you. Today we meet Sabrina V. Sabrina is a clinical social worker, and today she'll tell us a little bit about her story, some of the struggles in working in mental health, and we get to learn a little bit about empathy, burnout, brownout, and a few other things. Different though, today is going to be part 1 due to unforeseen circumstances. I hope you enjoy, and here it is. Hi, Sabrina. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. How's your week been?
So far, so good. I would say it's been productive.
Good. You've been excited about this?
Yes, absolutely.
So let's get right into it.
Okay.
Tell us your story.
My story, okay. Well, I grew up in New York City, in Manhattan, and grew up in the low-income neighborhood, went to a public school for elementary, middle school, all of that good stuff, into high school. And then I went away to college, upstate New York, studied social work, ended up falling into that, actually, because I initially thought I was going to study forensic science. I didn't want to deal with people, really. I wanted to deal with dead people.
Hell of a switch from dead people to social work.
I know. Yes, for sure. And actually hearing their stories and things like that. It ended up coming about from a elective class that I took. Yeah, the instructor was like someone well known in the community, and he had a program for inner city youth. And he was like, oh, I need college students that are going to help with at least mentoring these children. And I was like, okay, that resonates with me. I can do that. And so I started doing that, and that's where I got my calling, per se. And then I had like a midlife crisis and decided, okay, I'm going to shift from biology to social work.
What was that like for you?
Well, it was okay. I was excited about it, but I had some qualms about it as well. Just my childhood experience being exposed to the social work, or let's say foster care system. I didn't want to be in that field because I thought it came with certain, responsibilities and things like that I didn't really necessarily align with, as I thought at that moment that I didn't align with.
Right.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. You said you felt a calling.
Yeah.
What did that feel like?
It felt something very natural. Like I went into the space and I started working with those children, and I was like, this is what I should be doing with my life. And it was something that I didn't feel when I was taking my biology classes. That's totally different. And so the calling feeling was just like, this is calm. I feel like this resonates with me. I feel like I'm doing good work and being able to talk to people and help them. And so that's how that happened.
That's awesome. And did you know right there and then, like, I got to do something?
Yeah. I knew definitely in that moment that I need to shift my major at that point, but then realized like, okay, I'm not going to make much money. So
It's a lot different than forensics.
absolutely. I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to be poor, but helping people, I'm all for it. I was like, it's a give and take here. I'll do it.
How do you negotiate that? How do you negotiate helping people versus money?
Money. I realize that there's a reward that comes from it that clearly is not financial, but it's that spiritual and emotional, that you're doing a good deed and that you're helping someone through a tough time. And that alone is enough. I didn't realize at that moment that it was enough, but with time and being in the field a while, then I realized like, okay, there's more to this. And that's the reward I get, is being able to help.
So I don't want to take anything for granted. So why don't you explain, for anyone who may not know, what is social work?
Yeah. So social work is basically the discipline where you're helping someone with the full picture, I would say. You're helping them with maybe social issues, things that are happening in their community, family, the whole construct. They're seen as an entity within multi-layered, levels or whatever. Not as in other disciplines when you just focus on the person solely in front of you. So you're seeing how those other layers or systems affect the person and their life.
So it's not just the internal environment, it's the external as well.
Correct.
And then in relations to the person, right?
Yes.
I think that's actually object relations.
Yes.
All right. What do you think the motive, like not for other people, what is your motive in being in social work? Why social work?
That's a good question. Why social work? I think social work for me meant I would have.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No,
Don't focus on the social work part.
yes.
Why that kind of field?
Well, because I felt that because I was taking that class and because it was presented to me in that way that, look, you can help someone within the community and actually help them improve their lives within that environment. That's what to me was appealing, that it wasn't necessarily we need to remove you from your home or from your neighborhood, but exactly you can do this here and help others. So that's why social work to me was appealing.
So how do you negotiate? Like I know you can't talk about stories, but how do you deal with the stories you hear?
A lot of self-care and self-care and what is more than I think it's advertised on Instagram or on Pinterest is not just spas. It's actually like doing your own work. I think for me, that's something I take very seriously, is that I'm making sure my mental health is also up to par before I can help someone else. Because you can't really pour from an empty cup kind of thing.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Pour from an empty cup. So how important is it for you to look in the mirror and have your own mental health not figured out? Because I think that's the journey.
Yes.
Right. How important is it and how do you do that? Looking in that mirror.
It's a negotiation every day, I would say. It's something that I'm constantly checking in and saying, okay, do I have the right pieces in place to be present with clients or with friends, with myself, things like that. It's a constant check-in.
So approximately how long, and I know that you know that I know the answers to some of these questions, but I'm going to ask just for the sake of creating the whole picture. On average, on any given day, and even if you want to go pre-COVID, or actually let's just keep it the way it is now.
Okay.
So it's a lot more attainable and realistic. On average, how many people do you see a day?
4 to 5.
4 to 5. And how long do you see a person?
45 minutes to an hour.
So you're talking about a maximum of 4 to 5 hours a day you're spending in a virtual room of sorts.
Right. Face-to-face interaction. Video. Yes.
And in that hour, you're exposed to their story. You're exposed to them, but it's not like this platform. It's a little more it's a bit deeper, I imagine. And would it be safe to say that the focus is on, I don't want to say negative because it's not negative, but it's on the challenges that a person experienced?
Yes, most of the times a client is coming in with, hey, this is what happened this week. I need help processing this and that. I think for how I practice, I often try to, in some way, clearly build skills and see that you have strengths, you're resilient, you're able to get through certain things. And let's use those skills to help you get through maybe the present situation or build new skills.
So, let's pick one, 4 or 5. What's more predominant?
Usually 4.
So what's 4 times 5?
Yes.
20, right?
Yes.
20 hours in your week, you're exposed to other people's life and the various kind of challenges. And would you say that there is a pattern across all the people you see, or is it generally different case by case?
I would say recently it's been a pattern, mostly how everyone has been focused or impacted by COVID.
Right.
And the pandemic on multiple levels, like just interpersonally, but also financially, and just within their community, feeling isolated. So on multiple levels, people are experiencing just total discomfort.
And that's 20 hours of your week that you're spending exposed to that. Let's go back to self-care. How are you dealing?
Yeah.
So if 20 hours of your week is given to others.
Yes.
When do you give time to yourself?
Yeah. So in between sessions, I make sure that I'm working out, that I'm reading something that's not too heavy. Sometimes I do, and that's fine because it helps me in preparation for my next client. But I oftentimes like to read something very lighthearted or listen to a podcast episode or do something like that. Listen to music, dance around my room, whatever it is, eat a good meal. That's what helps me.
And is that directly to deal with those 20 hours, or is that just who you are?
I would say that's who I am, but to deal with it, I would say the exercising is something that I focus on because it allows me to just release that energy that we hold in our bodies.
Because I imagine that's a lot that you're taking on. And in order, with the empathy that you're having to practice with each individual person, especially now that everything's virtual, it's difficult to put all of yourself, understanding it's all virtual, read some of those nonverbal behaviors and blah, 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 and a bunch of other stuff. So Sabrina, who was born in Manhattan, who it sounds, because you skipped over it, but you get a pass unless you want to go deeper into it, which please do. But it sounds like you definitely faced adversity.
Yeah.
And you had a picture of what social work was from your own experiences.
Right. And it wasn't a positive one.
Did you want to talk more about that or no?
No, I don't actually.
Fair enough. But you became a social worker.
I did.
Do you think, and you don't have to answer this, it's a way to right wrongs that you feel were done onto you?
Yes and no.
And I mean systemic wrongs. I don't mean
personal, right?
Yeah, I'm not talking about human to human. I'm talking about however old you might have been, you developed a relationship or an understanding of what this field might look like. That's what I'm focusing on.
Yeah. I would say yes and no to that because, yes, I think that going into the field then had me realize that there's more to it, that there is actually systemic issues and obstacles that kind of force you to do certain things or doesn't allow you to help as much as you want to, things like that.
Systemic within social work specifically, or what do you mean systemic?
Yeah, I would say within social work. And that there's multiple avenues you can even take in that field. You can be someone that works in child protective services, or you can do case management. I mean, it goes on and on. You can be a therapist. And so I didn't realize that it was so vast. I thought, no, you're just a social worker that takes away kids.
Oh, now I get it. So you have like the umbrella. It's called social work. But underneath that umbrella, I assume then you're the therapist. You're the clinical one.
Correct.
Okay. So going back to another part, those 20 hours a week.
Mm-hmm.
Who else is Sabrina?
Who else is Sabrina? Someone that likes to have fun, someone that likes to relax, have time with my friends and family. Those things are very important to me. And someone that also is spontaneous at times as well, that just, hey, can we take a road trip somewhere or fly somewhere and just do something adventurous? Recently, I went with my friend actually to Vegas, and I never would have thought I would want to go to Vegas, but I did. And over there, we did like just some thrill-seeking things, like zip lining, and I wanted to do bungee jumping, but she didn't want to do it. I was like, why not? We only live once.
I like the attitude. So when was this?
This was like last June.
That's awesome. Have you had a chance to do anything similar since?
No, I haven't. Well, that's not true. Sorry, I totally forgot about that. Recently, this was a week ago, I actually did a helicopter ride with one of my friends.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, that was so much fun over New York City. And to be able to see the city from that view itself, I was like, wow, this thing is actually not that big. We see like all these boroughs and you got to take the train here and there. But yeah.
Yeah, the different perspective on it shows you how small it really is.
And how small we are as people, too.
Yeah.
That like, yeah.
So let me just come out and ask, why did you agree to do this?
I agreed to do it because I thought, hey, it's a chance to be able to share my story, but also give an opportunity for us to talk about social work or talk about life in general, like things that happen, like you were saying, outside of social work or my position. I'm a whole person as well. And so that part of me doesn't necessarily is highlighted anywhere else other than my relationships with friends and family.
So let me ask you, is it possible for you to differentiate your life and the hat you wear as a social worker from the hat that you wear as a friend versus the hat that you wear as a fill in the blank, but whatever hats, however many roles you're playing in life? How do you negotiate that? Especially that in order to do what you're doing clinically, you also have been exposed to a certain amount of knowledge and information that whether you like it or not, same with me, it's hard to unplug when dealing in those other relationships.
Absolutely. So for me, excuse me, I think that I try to be able to, have different boxes for different things, but I think sometimes the lines get blurred. And I've had on several occasions, not too many, but people that knew me from necessarily childhood, realizing that I always had I had these skills of being able to have empathy for someone else, hear their story, really want to understand better their thought process. But now being in the field, maybe the level of questioning or the way I formulate a question is more clinical because that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. And so I try not to blur, but it does happen. I would say it's an occupational hazard for sure.
Do your friends judge you on it? Do you like?
I do think that, and family too. I think people see what we do as we just talk to people about their issues, and there's more to it. There's a science behind it. It's not just listening to someone's story, but okay, how can you help them navigate, process through all of this? I just don't sit there and be like, okay, thank you for your story.
You're not a bartender.
Right.
There's a big difference. There's a reason why the training and everything, and it's tough to navigate those waters, wouldn't you say?
It is. And I would say when you're meeting new people, it's harder, I think even more so, because it's like meeting a new client, when you're presented with their story, at least I find for myself, sometimes I'm kind of seeing it from both ends. As Sabrina, who I am, and personally, but then also as a therapist. And I try to tell myself, no, don't do that.
How do you not do that?
I try to then say to myself, hey, I'm seeing this person for who they fully are versus, okay, I'm not trying to figure out or diagnose. What I'm trying to do is really get to know them with whatever that means, who they present themselves to be in front of me.
Do you think that maybe it's also something that people who work in this field like you and I, right? It's a really good defense that we have that keeps us at bay from engaging in situations that might be difficult or whatever. Did you ever experience that?
I think so, because oftentimes on how you're questioning or seeing things, you may then realize, okay, this may be an issue, but is it really an issue? Like, have you actually given it time to process?
Well, have you?
I think that sometimes I do. There are times that I think I'm hasty in my decision making because of my background.
Do you find that you meeting someone tomorrow is a lot different than talking about a cousin that you've known since you were a little girl?
Yes.
Now having that information that you've learned as a clinical social worker, do you ever reflect back on situations that may have occurred in your life or people that you've known? It doesn't have to be even family. It could be just a friend that you grew up with in Manhattan, right? And almost like hindsight, diagnose and hindsight, analyze.
Yes.
Even if there might not be a goal of conclusion. It could just be you're sitting around.
I do think that oftentimes, at least for childhood experiences, I do reflect on that and say, was this happening? Was this happening? What could be the cause of this issue per se, or why this dynamic was the way that it was? Trying to fill in the gaps, because I think oftentimes we just, as humans, behave in ways, unexplicable ways. And it's just because of what's happening in that present moment. But you don't know that depending on what age you're being exposed to that. And so when you feel like, okay, I don't really understand the full story and why this impacted me the way it did, I reflect back and think, now, knowing what I know, being at a different point of my life, how could I understand or empathize with that individual? Or try to figure out like what was happening.
That is a lot.
It is. And it can be like overwhelming emotionally. But I don't do it all the time, but when the moments that I do, it can feel like a lot to deal with and process. And that's where I lean on friends and even my own therapist, because that's also really important. I think I alluded to that earlier, that our mental health is just as important as anyone else's, because we're human too, and we have our own stories.
Yeah, and I think that, so having your own story and now having all the clinical information and the skills where for at least 20 hours a week, you're jumping and diving in and continuing your education to learn how to navigate through, whether it be defenses, whatever challenges exist for you between you and a client.
Right.
How do you not do that to self?
That's a good question. I think, well, those moments that I'm reflecting on self, I try to keep to when I meet with my therapist, or if I'm just like reflecting in a journal or something like that, because it's very easy for us to be hard on ourselves about decisions we've made in the past or errors that, as we see it now, may not actually have been errors. It was just what we knew at the time. And I think having that empathy within, even for ourselves, is important. But I learned that over time. It wasn't necessarily that I knew right away.
So compartmentalization, to a certain extent, is something that you've had to learn how to practice and become a little bit better at.
Yeah, I think it's something that I've probably been practicing my whole life, actually, where because of my childhood experiences, I felt like I had to navigate multiple things. And so to be successful in academic world is what I'm kind of referring to. And I would say socially too, but to be able to do that, I couldn't allow what was going on at home or family dynamics to impact my success in that area or arena. So at a very young age, I was told, I learned along the way that things can be happening in different areas of your life, but like they can't bleed over. You have to find some way to function, at least for me, to keep everything in its box. Sometimes they do, and I realize that's okay now, but there was a time that it had to really be in those rigid boxes.
Do you find that things as now that you're a little bit older than those childhood experiences, and do you find that there's maybe some more, you've built waterways for the bleeding over to reach? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I would say yes, because I feel more comfortable with my story, but also that it's okay if it bleeds over, because it doesn't mean like it's not a negative thing. It's just either something about this dynamic is causing me to feel this way or react this way, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's just being aware that may be the case.
Is there some things that exist in some of those boxes, as you said, that you purposely kind of want to take? So even some of the most negative experiences, do you think that any experience is just one thing?
No. For me, I think they're life lessons. It teaches you how do you react in certain situations at that time of your life. But it definitely does carry over. I see it as it's building skills to deal with other challenges that may come up. It's just like making you stronger.
Right. So in any situation, however, even if in hindsight it is negative and it was a hell of a challenge, it could be traumatic, it could be a whatever, there's still positive you can pull out of it.
Yes, that's what I try to highlight always, that it could be challenging, but you're able, something about this you learn from it. Yeah.
Have you found a way to reach back in some of those boxes and actually, maybe you don't want to, like I'm curious, where you pull out some of the positivity that's entrenched around pain or around a negative experience, but you actually go back and revisit those boxes just to take that positive lesson because maybe it's worth it to apply to other boxes?
I do. I tend to wait a long time before I go back, though, into those boxes. I think the appropriate thing for me to do and being able to see the situation objectively, I need time and space to have processed through it, or just distance from the situation itself to then be like, oh, I can see the positive in that. But if it like happened yesterday, I don't know if I'll see the positive.
I think that's very normal.
Yeah.
That's an impossibility. Yeah. Empathy.
Yeah.
You talked about empathy. Do you feel, and I'm really curious to know this, that after a certain amount of time practicing,
compassion fatigue?
not just compassion fatigue, but do you find that empathy could sometimes be our go-to defense against looking in our own mirrors? People in this field, like, we spend so much time, right? We're looking at our clients. We are compassionate as hell. We're aware of compassion fatigue. I'm glad you brought that up. We're aware of brownout. We're aware of burnt out. We're aware of self-care, or at least it's shoved in our face at every corner.
Yes.
And whether you're exercising, doing yoga, eating health, like exercising, like you said, do you find that sometimes just the empathy and our focus of empathy is a way for us to run away from having to deal with our own?
We'll have to think about that. I would say in a way it is and it isn't. I think to do what we do, you have to have the ability to be empathetic. Just bare minimum. You wouldn't get far in this field if you don't have that ability. However, I do think it's to a fault. Anything on the extremes can be harmful. And so with this, I think that, yeah, you could say like I'm empathetic to this situation that's occurring, but maybe not realizing like how is this impacting you? I guess for me, thinking about what's happening in the world today. And it could be socially, or it could be this health issue, public health issue we have going on. And people are empathetic that in other countries, at least early on, were dying, being exposed to this virus. And people were, oh my God, that's horrible. But when it doesn't directly impact you, you're like, okay, good luck to them. But then when you see that it's in your community, it's affecting your neighbor, it's affecting your grandmother and whomever, then you realize like, okay, this is deeper.
Yeah.
And so for me, I think, sometimes it's a cop-out.
And I know, like, the question is not aimed at when you're in session.
Mm-mm.
Like, in session, you have no choice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I guess you do, but to do good work, at least my opinion.
Right.
But, all right, so the example, I think it was yesterday, Donald Trump has COVID.
Yes.
And it's not been 24 hours. And I'm really happy that it's you and I sitting here talking today, because both of us are in this field of empathy, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It's challenging to be empathetic with an individual that you may not have the same views as, and someone who has blatantly disrespected others, people he does not know, and just his mindset overall. Nothing political, literally just how he treats like human to human contact or interactions. And so for me, I find it challenging in being empathetic to him with his name, knowing that he is who he is. But on a human level, I do check in and say, but he's just like me, and he is suffering through being exposed to this virus. But it took a little more thinking and processing before I got there. It wasn't my initial thoughts.
Why?
Because I find that when we're confronted at times with people that have differing views than we do, we see them as the other, and sometimes not even as humans. And so it's easy to be like, oh, this is great. Like, he is sick and he's such a horrible person, blah, blah, blah. But it's just like people that are exposed to a KKK member, and you're a person of color, and maybe they need your blood or you need their blood. And how does that work? And this person really hates you on a deep level for something that you can't even control. And those moments, I think, are just very precious in the fact that it reminds us that we're human, and that regardless of what we look like, regardless of our faith and whatever else, we're people.
There is a common ground. But when I asked you the question, do you remember laughing?
Yes, because I was like, that was so challenging.
Right. I find it just as challenging. But we're human too, right?
Yes. But I think we're expected to be.
Are you seeing a flickering?
Yes. I'm trying to ignore it because I'm like.
It's one light bulb. For
a moment there, and I don't know if this is appropriate or whatever, I was like, maybe there's like a spiritual presence in this room.
Oh, this podcast for real. We call on ancestral shit here.
I was like, whoa.
No, I saw it once earlier, and I was like, what in the blue hell is happening? And then,
it lost its mind. And,
so for people that are not watching the video, apparently in the room that we're sitting in, there's a light bulb about to be bad. So anyway.
That's what happened. But yes.
We're human.
We're human. But I think even how we perceive ourselves and maybe how others perceive us, we're expected to be at a different level of being when you're not. You just are always able to be empathetic and have no other feelings other than empathy.
And that's also going back a second. Do you think our empathy is sometimes bullshit, that it doesn't let us be human? It's very easy for me to sit here and say, well, I'm going to take the moral high ground. And that's a sentence I really hate using, because it's not about a high ground and low ground. Look in the goddamn mirror. Who the hell are you? Based on that, make a decision on how you feel about whatever is the stimuli in front of you, So Donald Trump gets COVID.
Yes.
We're expected that we're empathic, right?
All the time.
As mental health practitioners, or whatever you want to call it. We're expected that we know too much. And we have our own politics. We have our own like ideals and morals and whatever. Do you think that if we're honest with ourselves and saying, no, I'm fucking glad that this guy's got COVID, it's karma, come back and bite you in the ass, does that make us bad?
No. It doesn't. But I do think that someone seeing us from the position of what we do professionally, it probably wouldn't, what I think would be perceived positively, but it's not necessarily negating the truth of what we feel in that moment and that we are human.
It might not be the politically correct thing to say.
Yeah.
How about this? How about if it wasn't, Trump and Melania that got it, but what if it was Biden and his wife?
I think the response would be totally different.
Why? And are you talking about societal response or yours?
I was thinking societal, actually.
All right.
But personal, yes, I think it would have been different too. I would have been like, oh, wow, that's so sad. Like, he's such a great person and he's trying to do the good, good work, the good fight. And so sad he's been exposed as so many other people.
So what if I was to tell you that someone watching this is going to look at us as two liberally minded people sitting down praising that Trump is sick?
What would I think or feel about that?
Yeah, what would you say to that?
They can think and feel whatever they want.
They will anyway. But is that what we're doing?
I don't think so.
I'm challenging us, both of us, to think about it differently, which is why I said, what if Biden's the one that had it?
Right.
Is our belief system political? Like in this case, obviously it's political. And I guess based on the past 4 years, almost 4 years, there's a lot of morals and values that have kind of been muddled. And you can even go as far as saying there's a lot that we can really get into from some of the stuff that's happened and continues to happen.
Right.
The race relation stuff, the whatever.
I think that all compounding with that fact that we are in a pandemic still makes even our work more challenging because, yet again, we're human. And so we're also going through the same journey, similar, of being exposed to this traumatizing experience that everyone is experiencing at the same moment, right? It's not like, oh, I don't know, something happened in your childhood that's very specific to your background. And okay, I can empathize with that, but I didn't experience it at the same time, nor did I have an understanding of that. Versus we've all been hit with this in some way or form.
Yeah. It's a lot. Yeah. Conceptually, what you said, spot on. Another thing you touched on is actually, it's weird, and I'm going to take it there, is some people do say, how can you help someone if you've never experienced what they've been through? What would you say to that?
You definitely can help someone because there's so many stories, the billions of people on this planet, that there's no way you can relate to every given story and everything that's occurred, but you can understand on a logical level, you can understand on a human, like emotional level, how that is challenging, and then using the science to then help, go through that process, then I think, it's obviously you're able to do it.
Right. So let me ask you this, to give an example and not to beat a dead horse, but
Okay.
So let's say I'm in the military and I just got back from Vietnam.
Okay.
And I clearly am showing post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, whatever. That's a diagnosis that's floating in your head at least.
Okay.
And then you and I are sitting in a session and I say to you, what do you know about war? You've never been to war. You grew up in Manhattan as a rich person. And look at your age. You're so young. And plus, I am white and you are black. How in the blue hell can you help me?
I would say, hey, we all have a story and yours is what it is. I would love to hear about it and get more understanding based on what you present to me. I can't make any assumptions of what even it was like to be at war, but I would like to understand more by you just, if you are open to it, sharing with me what that was like for you and go from there. But I can't necessarily, I guess, lie. I'm not going to say, oh, yes, I understand what you've been through because I've been through something challenging as well. That's not helpful.
Yeah.
No, I think, just calling it for what it is. No, I don't understand. I've worked with a lot of parents and I'm not a mom. I don't have any like stepchildren or anything like that. So I don't know that experience, what that's like to navigate how to raise your children, take care of a home and all of those things. And I'm just honest about that. I don't get it. I know the science of what is said you should do with children, but I know that that doesn't always work. And so we're just going to do a lot of trial and error. I'm going to continue getting to know you and your child, and let's go from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of great answer, by the way. Great answer. Because it was kind of a loaded question. Mm-hmm. But a lot of people forget that there's a lot of power in sharing that story of whatever it is that you experienced. Mm-hmm. And then because of the fact that this is a science, it's a social science, still a science, and we have to follow the scientific method and research and all of the other stuff, right, that even though a 25-year-old or however old brand new therapist or whatever, or counselor may have not been through something, right, you can still help someone out. Mm-hmm. But before you can help them out, I need to know your story. Mm-hmm. I need to create that space for you. Right. And then you have to be willing to be vulnerable enough to occupy that space, which takes time. Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to be able to utilize the science behind the overarching diagnosis to be able to address the technical, mechanical, and the semantic differences that differentiate your story to the overarching scientific approach. Is that a good summarization, at least, of?
Absolutely. Yeah, you did great.
Thanks. Try. So going back, you're a human being.
Yes.
You're wearing many different roles. Mm-hmm. In a global pandemic where you can't be as spontaneous as you may want to be and jump on a plane and go to Vegas to zip line and bungee jump, you've been able to find time to do a helicopter ride.
Yes.
As part of your self-care, you have been able to still have some kind of unplug moment from those 20 hours that you give up to someone else. Mm-hmm. Now, I've painted a picture of saying like those 20 hours are bad. At least I'm feeling it that way. Do you see it that way?
I don't. I actually enjoy those 20 hours because you build relationships with every single person that you meet with on a weekly, bi-weekly, whatever basis. And so for me, I'm not going to lie to you. There may be on the odd chance one of those interactions I am not too excited to engage in. And that's the human side of me.
Right.
Where I'm like, okay. And I check in, why is it that it's not that good for me? Is it because I'm being challenged in this dynamic? Or is it something coming up for me? Whatever the case may be. But I'm aware that that does occur. And then the other interactions, I may be challenged in a different kind of way, but I'm more open to it. One thing that we didn't talk about when it comes to social work, but I think it's so key, or just being a clinician overall, is that there's supervision. And supervision, for those that don't know, is when you meet with independently licensed social worker or counselor, whatever your field of practice is, who has been in the field for quite some time, and they have the clinical background to be able to help you process things that come up with clients, but also personal things as well. If you're feeling triggered by an interaction with a client or a colleague, and how to navigate those things. So even being an independently licensed clinician myself, I still seek out those moments to have those check-ins, because I don't think so high of myself that I don't need to check in with anyone. No, I'm still a human being.
Yeah, right. And let me ask you this, and I'm just curious. With the compartmentalization part that we talked, and I know it seemed like I'm glancing over what you just said about supervision. I'll come back to that, but I like to speak in retrospect to a certain extent. So compartmentalization and bleeding over regarding our own lives, right? And you're spending 20 hours a week with other people that are sharing their story. Just mathematically speaking, you must have engaged with someone that has said or expressed a word or described an emotion that was one of those boxes exploded for you. What do you do?
I make note of it in my brain when it pops up, and then I'm like, I got to put that to the side. I need to be present in the moment with this person. I cannot allow my brain to go like haywire and go down that rabbit hole, because it's very easy, and it's easy to project whatever your experience was onto the person that's sharing their story. Right. And that's not fair.
So that's your triage, right?
That's like the initial. Yeah.
So that's that initial moment. Now your work day's over.
Yeah. Usually then I'm like, okay, I need to speak to someone about this. And that's when I will speak to someone who is either in the field and understands how this dynamic works, or I will seek out a time to meet with my supervisor. And or I am an avid reader. And so oftentimes I would find myself looking to read something that may help me navigate this challenge, or how to empathize or understand this person's situation if I haven't experienced it, or if I have, and how to do it from the clinical lens, not a personal lens.
That's all, and you have found that it is possible to stay present in that moment. Like a session is 45 minutes to an hour.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
In that, if the person says it, I don't know, like in 20 minutes in, for the rest of the time, for the other 25 minutes at least, right? You can do it.
I think I can. It's challenging.
Now, take yourself out of it. Do you think it's a human thing that we could do that? Where you can remove your story when it's so like right there.
So close.
Hey, we've identified the light bulb. I know which one I have to address.
Okay, cool. Yes and no, depending on the situation. I think that we have the ability to do it for short periods of time. I think if I was being exposed to something that was so close, like you said, so triggering for 2 days, I don't think I would be able to withstand, being empathetic and objective in responding to that person or that situation. I would literally have to remove myself.
Makes sense, right? I get, we're human. You said it so well regardless of, you and I putting our hand together. Like I'm not white, but I am not black. I'm not a dark man, to say the least, regardless of what we look like, we're still human. And the commonality is we can only be exposed to so much before it can sometimes break us.
Correct.
Now in session, you can triage it. What about the rest of your life? How, you mentioned your clients are going through the pandemic. You mentioned your clients are going through what every other person, I think, globally is going through.
Yes.
We want a bit of sense of normalcy, and hell, there might be lucky because you said you don't have kids or anything. So you're not worried about pods.
Or remote learning and all this other stuff.
You don't have to deal with that. And the other things that you don't have to deal with that maybe other people have to deal with. For an example, you're seeing your clients virtually. You have a job.
Yes.
You have income. Another challenge someone else may not have.
Correct.
So all these things compounded. And you can still find a separation between the two. But how are you dealing with your life kind of turned upside down?
Yeah. I think trying to engage in daily gratitude. I literally sometimes have to wake up in the morning and just be in faith, in saying for me and what I believe in, saying, thank God I'm another day on this planet, and that I'm able to open up my eyes and load up my computer and have access to Wi-Fi. Literally, at times I have to have that conversation with myself, because it's very easy to forget that this is somewhat of a privilege and what we have access to versus other people in the world who are being exposed to the same thing as we are in terms of the pandemic and don't have all these other luxuries. And I see them as luxuries because having a computer is not a necessity. Food and shelter is. And I think even people just don't have that either. So Yes, reminding myself, but it's hard some days. So I'm just like, I don't want to do this. I don't want to meet with any clients. I just want to lay in bed and just binge watch on whatever.
Yeah, right. This just popped in my head. Do you think that a lot of people always say the grass is always greener, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you think to a certain extent, because of the exposure that you have, you look over the same fence, but you don't say the grass is always greener? It's easier to say the grass is always shittier, or the grass is always not shittier. My bad. The grass is always yellower or more yellow.
Yeah. I mean, I would say we all are just going through stuff. And so it's like, do you want to deal with it in this situation, in this environment, or would you prefer that other person's experience? There's no place that I think the area is just green, right? And vibrant all the time. There are shitty moments.
But isn't that the expectation? Is that especially the pressure of all the knowledge that you have about self and psychology and therapy and social work and all the stuff that you've been exposed to for, I'm not outing age or anything, but how long would you say you've been practicing, if you don't mind me asking?
Full-time and like practicum, or you're saying?
I guess since you have you, like, since graduating, have you held any other, like, you've been working the whole time in this field since graduating, right?
Correct.
So how many years has that been, give or take, if you don't mind?
Yeah, give or take, I would say that's 5 years. And prior, like being in school, yes, you practice, but not so intimately. It's very brief because you're just building your skills at that point and understanding the system itself.
Now, it takes approximately how long to develop a habit? In your professional opinion, I guess.
Right. Say 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Let's just go a month.
Yeah.
Let's say a month. It takes a month for you to develop a habit.
Yeah.
You've had 5 years. As those 5 years, you're not just a social worker, because I think we agree that's just one hat you wear. How in the hell are you dealing as a person, as a human being, with wearing that hat, wearing the hat of knowing your own story and whatever that hat looks like, but everything else that you would get to experience it, because again, I've been referring to you as a she, right?
Yes.
How do you deal with that? And again, I'm not trying to manipulate this,
Right.
but Black?
Yeah.
Do you mind sharing your cultural background?
Yes, of course. So I would say I'm New Yorican. And for those that don't understand, it's a Puerto Rican that grew up in New York City. And that's just the term or label that was placed to differentiate the individuals that grew up on the island of Puerto Rico, which is a different experience in itself. And so, yeah, I think with this, it's navigating both identities, because for me, one, I see myself as a Hispanic individual that has this other, I guess, set of roots, but not different from an African American necessarily who was raised in this country and all of that, meaning the African roots and Native American roots are similar, not the same tribes, but hey, it's all similar and being affected by the African diaspora. And so for me, I find that it's been challenging because initially, I think before there was a lot of marches or riots or whatever people were trying to say was going on with the Black Lives Matter movement, in the Latino culture, it was seen as an experience of the other. But I'm like, we're not so far removed. Like, in a lot of ways, we are of similar background. We have the same experience of being marginalized and being seen as less than, and whatever those experiences have been. But I don't see myself as like one or the other. I see myself as both. And it's hard to sometimes navigate both of those things, because in the African American culture, I may not necessarily be seen as officially Black. And in the Latino culture, there's colorism as in other cultures. And so how to navigate that within itself in our own community. And so I find myself just being like, I don't know what to do. Like, Yeah. Where it's just, I just want to support both. And that I feel like I'm part of both. But when you don't feel accepted by both, then what do you do?
You're always the other.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When even like in those moments where you feel like, wait, I'm in my own community. Your own community reminds you, but wait, bonus, you're not.
Right. For whatever they think that is, right? It's for some individuals, I think at this point it's been coined the Afro Latino, and now that is its own community because so many individuals felt outside of their own group because of having African roots. And I think it's just a lack of education, really, of that we're all interconnected.
It's funny because a couple episodes ago, I think Dr. Chris, I would have loved to have him sitting here
That would have been
to
great.
offer some insight.
Yes.
Especially that we've talked about other a few times, but I don't bring that up because I'm trying to go towards what's happening. If it doesn't, so be it. But it's going back to those boxes. Is that as a woman, who would you say then you're both Latina
Yes.
and you're also Black, and then now you're also Afro Latina?
Yes. It would be all of those things. And I'm okay with the fact that I don't necessarily fit in any of those categories neatly. But I don't think any of us really do. We just like to think that we do.
Yeah. That bubble, whatever bubble we want to fit in, whatever box we want to check. I think we all have several boxes, and we choose the one in that moment that appeals to us the best to serve whatever motive we may have.
Yeah.
But also, that's not where I was going.
Well, in talking about that, though, I think growing up, that's something that I had to really, I guess, go through whatever. Where growing up in my family, oftentimes it would be said like, okay, we're Puerto Rican because, like I said, I grew up in Manhattan. There's a big Puerto Rican community there, but there's also a really big African American community, and we've always merged and just rejoiced together, right?
Yeah, you brought hip hop.
Hip hop.
Yeah, you brought hip hop.
Right.
The Bronx and other areas. Yeah.
Right. And so to me, it was like the norm. I'm like, that's my brother or that's my friend or cousin or whatever. And yeah, maybe they're not of the same cultural background, quote unquote, but we're like the same people. However, in my home, and maybe this won't be seen keenly by other people, it was said, we're Puerto Rican, we're not African American, we're different. And then it was very clear to me at a young age that there were boxes. And that although this person looks like me, because of this cultural background, it is seen that we are not the same.
Yeah.
And that was hard for me to navigate because I was like, but I'm brown when I look in the mirror. And so I'm confused. And I had to challenge my family all through my childhood and I think adolescence, where I did my own like researching and looking into our history to say, yeah, we're not so different. And actually, it's all the one and the same. And it doesn't make sense why we're trying to put each other in these boxes, but whatever makes you feel good. And just having my family accept that we do have African roots and that's okay. That's not something that we should hide away, although historically, right, we were told to do so because of the African diaspora and colonization and all of those things, that Blackness is seen as a negative thing, as we are seeing in the world today.
Yeah.
This is something I was exposed to at a very young age within a community of color, though.
That I don't think is talked about enough at all. Yeah. I think a lot of people are not aware that within the Black community, so I'm going to take you out of this for a minute. Okay. There is colorism.
Yes.
That's true. There's a big difference between, do you wear your hair natural? Do you straighten it? That has its own thing.
I heard that all the time growing up. It was expected that if you have curlier hair like me, that you would use some form of product, perm, something like that, to make it easier to straighten because you wanted to look more Eurocentric. And I just couldn't get it, but that was something I was being taught. As I got older, I'd made a clear decision not to do that, to decide I'm going to wear my hair natural, and that's okay. And if I want to switch it up and I want to straighten it, so be it. If I want to braid it, cool. But that is not an expectation because I'm trying to fit an ideal.
See, I bring all this up because it's just another layer of the things that you have to do when you're waking up out of bed tomorrow morning to look and see that your phone has the little like bars that tell you that you're connected to Wi-Fi. Yeah. And you have to take that moment to say, the debate was a shit show. And I'm not even saying that as a Republican or a Democrat, but what in the blue hell did I see as an American, right?
Right. And then there was the indictment of the officers, right, that were there for the Breonna Taylor.
It's just a,
right, case. And being a woman of color and also someone that has lived in multiple places, it's challenging when day in and day out you're coming across the news headline, someone else being killed or someone else dying from a airborne whatever virus, and you're just like, is the world going to shit? Like, what is happening?
What if I was to tell you that the other day I decided to go out for a walk?
Okay.
So we're in agreement about one thing, right? That in the past however many months, we had George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake. I'm not going to continue on. I don't know all the names, but it's been too much.
Gives me chills.
Right. And I'm going to focus on from your perspective.
Yes.
A woman of color, Latino, the little bits of pieces of what you've shared about your past.
Yeah.
And navigating those difficult waters of who am I and identity stuff, and debate. And do you consider yourself American?
Yes.
And I only say that because there are some people, it just goes like, no, I'm Puerto Rican, even if it's a territory or whatever, you know? Anyway, so there is love for this country. You're looking at the political part of it.
Yeah.
And then there's also the 20 hours of therapy.
Yes.
Sometimes it could seem kind of doom and gloom, right?
At times, yes. And that's when I guess that self-care piece comes into play and just overall disconnection. Like sometimes I just don't watch the news. Like I just can't do it today. Or I can't read anything heavy. So what I'm going to do is just listen to some meditative music and just be in silence and accepting of that. That's just, I'm trying to create a bubble for myself, even if it's just short term, something to like preserve a level of sanity.
Do you feel like that is, it's kind of a tough question and a tough way to say it, I guess, but that it's avoidant? Do you feel like by unplugging your phone, by turning it off, I'm not going to look at news anymore? Does it mean the news is not out there?
No, I know that it is, and that it's very real and things are happening outside my door or whatever. It is still being able to be present when I guess in those moments when I have to be present and when I need to be informed about what's happening in the world and in my community. But there's only so much, as you had said earlier, that one can take and be able to like grasp and like just absorb on a daily basis. And so sometimes it does take the disconnection. And I think people, I'm going to take this on a different maybe path, is that people may see that negatively. They may say, well, you don't want to hear about what's going on in the world and there's people really suffering out here and that you need to do this, X, Y, and Z. And oftentimes I hear that towards how our Caucasian brethren maybe handle or are exposed and experience the information of what's happening in the world in the community of color and Black communities specifically. And people look at it negatively, like, oh, maybe not participating actively, that it's a negative thing. But in reality, maybe it's just they're trying to be present when they have to be, but it's also challenging. Like, they're human too. And so, yes, I guess for me, it's like I empathize with that you may not have all the words, you don't understand it fully because you're not in that community, and you just want to take a minute to just be like, life is good, even if it's just within my home.
Yeah. And the argument against that could be, well, you've never struggled. Mm-hmm. You've never been through shit. Mm-hmm. You're like how did you say, the Caucasian brethren, right?
Yep.
Where have you seen the challenges I've seen?
Mm-hmm.
When you went to school,
yeah,
and again, this is not my perspective at all. Mm-hmm. I'm playing devil's advocate.
I
know. You've never had to worry about shit. You don't even deserve the empathy, mm-hmm. because much like what we're talking about, the Vietnam veteran, mm-hmm. dude, you want to apply to college? Cheers. You want to buy a new house? You don't got to worry about redlining. Mm-hmm. You want to do this? You got it. Mm-hmm. Oh, you have a drug habit? You can get to rehab a lot easier than I can, because it's expected that you're supposed to be on Wall Street. Mm-hmm. I'm expected to be in jail. Right. Still empathize?
I think we can. We don't always choose to, because sometimes we want to continue on a narrative that helps us feel good about how we navigate our lives. And so it's nice, I guess, in that moment you feel like, well, if I keep this person in that box and in that storyline, then maybe I don't need to look at myself and how do I play a role in all of this? Not that anyone is at fault, but I'm saying there are certain things in interactions with people that sometimes we have to look at ourselves and say, are we just making gross generalizations about a group of people?
Are we being guilty of the same things that they clearly and historically and even currently are guilty of?
Right.
What if I was to tell you, well, isn't that a reasonable reaction?
I think it is a reasonable reaction. I don't think anyone would fault, even though there are some people that do, that say, hey, that happened in the past. That was 400 years ago. You guys should have gotten over it. We've all heard that. It's like, it doesn't work that way.
My favorite's 400 years ago. Try the 1970s when you were actively doing it, the 60s. But again, education is kind of taking a shit on every level.
Right.
But what I meant is it's so easy for any minority person right now.
Yes.
To deflect responsibility and personal responsibility by blaming history.
Yep.
By blaming, I don't even know how to say it except for what it really is, like the fact that Breonna Taylor is dead. Yeah. And the justice that's being sought out is for the fucking drywall. Makes my blood boil to a level that, anyway. We watched a man die for not. I mean, I could not watch that video. I don't intend to. Call me whatever you want. Can't do it. A man die for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. Trust me, sympathy and empathy with that community.
Absolutely.
It wrecks me. And I'm also saying history has taught us something. If you are Latino, if you're Black, if you are other, right?
Yeah.
If you are other and you're not part of the group that gets to label the other.
That's the thing. It's like, who is the one that's not part of the other?
Well,
right.
there is one. If you're not part of that group, I am still going to sit here and challenge you that I get it.
Yeah.
There is more reasons to be pissed off. There's reasons to be out there. And when someone said, like, I've made the mistake on this podcast by constantly referring it to as protesting. It's not protesting. I'm actually talking about the destruction of property, the looting. I saw a video, I think you and I watched it together, of the woman that's saying you're lucky we're seeking equality and not seeking revenge.
Yes.
That video sticks out to me. It's pretty difficult to even think about that video. And I'm still sitting here saying, what if I challenge you to, well, history has told you no one's going to help you out. The system is what the system is. And the community, the second that you talk about white privilege, they're going to say, I'm not privileged. The second you talk about white fragility, they're going to discount it without seeing the irony. The second that you bring in history, they're going to tell you 400 years ago and negate things that are happening a month ago. Even presently, what was it, 2 days ago?
Yes.
Right. That's all ignored because it's now easier to say, but these are just bad apples. There's no systemic problem. Well, isn't the grand jury part of a system? And you release the tapes, which I don't know if I'm going to listen to 20 hours of grand jury tapes. However, the tapes are released from the grand jury. Let's see what that's like. The Attorney General, by the way.
Yes, I did watch that.
What is he? And that's a terrible question. But he's a black man, from the looks of it at least.
Right.
Like, at least in the picture, he's a black man. Yeah, no one's saying that the system is necessarily defined by the color at this point. Because you're right, over the course of time, there's been more diversity in Congress and the Senate. And yes, Obama, we had a black president. I get it. I understand your argument. There's been real, that's not the progress we're talking about.
Exactly.
The system hasn't changed.
It's about mindset, overall mindset. You can put whatever policy into place. It's like the Jim Crow laws. Okay, integration and equal rights for all. That sounds all great and dandy, but in practice and in people's hearts, if that's not genuine in what you actually want to accomplish, the things that occurred is why they occurred, because it wasn't on a deep level what you truly believed. And then that just kind of continues to expand, like you said, on a systemic level. If the overall mindset of the system, the people within that system, is not, hey, we actually do want better. We want to understand. We want to not be violent and harm other individuals just because of their color or sex or whatever.
It's funny. I like to think about it this way. It's like me bringing you into this room and I beat the living shit out of you.
Okay.
And then tomorrow I bring you into this room and beat the shit out of you. And I do it for, I don't know, 400 years. But then one day I change all the curtains and I repaint the room. And I bring you into this room and you look, and aesthetically, this room's completely different. No desk, but a round table rather than rectangular. Okay. Curtains are different, paint's different, but I'm still beating the shit out of you. Just the room looks different.
Doesn't change anything.
Right. If you don't change the problem,
yes.
If you don't address the actual problem, nothing's really going to change. You could put makeup on it.
Yep.
You can black out your Instagram account for a day. Right.
That doesn't change anything.
Yeah, you could say, here at Apple, we stand with Brianna. Yes. Or here at fill in the blank with whatever empty symbolic gesture. Yes. And maybe that's change for you. And believe it or not, I'm not judging that. Everyone has to take their own pace. And I'm not bringing this to, it's starting to feel like a soapbox moment for me or a pedestal moment. And that's not what it is. It's going back to saying you're clearly, and I could see a little of the emotions even in your eyes, that this matters to you.
Yes.
And it's the same look in your eyes about the social work, the work that you're doing with these 20 individuals, 20 plus, whatever it may be, even one. Let's just go to one.
Yeah.
You give a shit.
I do.
You're passionate about it. You're passionate about all these things. Yeah. I'm going to ask you again. How in the hell do you deal?
Sometimes, and you've posed this earlier, and yes, it's the self-care. Yes, it's reaching out to the friends and family. Sometimes I don't know. I just do it. And I think more can be done by us just showing up and being present for each other than not. And so there are days that I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen today, what's going to be shared with me in this session, or how I'm going to feel after this session or during, but we're going to get through it together.
All right, so we're going to do a little psychoeducation, as we would say in our field, right?
Yes.
And you may know this, but I'm just going to sum it up as fast as I can. Mm-hmm. So in some of the psychological theories, you have someone, Sigmund Freud, right? Mm-hmm. Introduced the idea of 3 levels of consciousness. Yes. You have the subconscious, pre-consciousness, and consciousness, right? Right. And even though this is not necessarily true, think of consciousness as at the top of your head, like right there in your forehead. Mm-hmm. Think of pre-consciousness in the middle. Yes. Subconscious like in the back.
Yes. By the reptilian.
Spine. Right. Mm-hmm. Let's just pretend like that's how it is. Mm-hmm. You've been talking about mindfulness. Yeah. And then we're done with the psychoeducation part. You've been talking about mindfulness this entire time, about being present. Yeah. Being aware of your surroundings.
And self.
Mm-hmm. More importantly, self, actually.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's something that we practice on a day-to-day level? And if so, what part of those 3 things that I talked about, consciousness, pre, and sub, do we practice mindfulness? How mindful are we as human beings? And I'm going to ask you philosophically, then bring it right back to you. So how mindful do you think, just people are?
I don't think, in a general sense, people are that mindful about what they're doing and why they're doing it. You're doing it. It's happening, I would say, on that mid and subconscious level. And I would say 10% of what we do and say comes from the consciousness, like you said, like the front of the brain, the decision-making center. For the most part, we're kind of acting from those other levels. For those that, like you said, don't know, just the desire to eat, the desire to have sex, the desire to take a nap, like those things are not something that comes from a conscious level. It's just signs that we're getting from our body that I should eat now, messages that are happening. And then, yes, it comes to the conscious part of your brain, but that's not necessarily starting there. And for me, I would say in those moments when I am present with my clients, that's when I'm operating from that 10% of being conscious. Mm-hmm. Because then, it could be bad if I'm just focused on what's happening in my brain versus what the client is telling me and being able to help them through that. But for the most part, I'm working from that sub and middle conscious here.
It's interesting. So how many people do you think had certain things in their subconscious? Mm-hmm. And by people, I'm not limiting it to cultural identity, gender, sexual orientation, none of that. Mm-hmm. Just humans. How many people do you think in the past year, with everything that's been happening, starting actually
January, February, around that time?
Yeah.
Okay.
With a global pandemic.
Yep.
An election year. Mm-hmm. All the things that have been happening in the news. Mm-hmm. George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, so on and so forth. How many people do you feel like that they've been confronted with dealing with some subconscious shit?
So many, and that's something that I've experienced personally, but I also have heard that oftentimes people, but pre-COVID, pre all of this time stuff, people were just doing the rat race of going to work and then going out to happy hour, whatever, and then coming back home and starting all over again, but not really thinking much about anything or how their life relates with anyone else's. They were just doing their routine.
Right.
But then when your routine is like, no, and now you have to create a new routine, and then you're like, well, what do I even want to do with my time? Because all this time I was working. Yeah, it makes you reevaluate a lot of things.
Yeah. Things have been thrust into so many different levels where certain things that you've done out of routine, lack of mindfulness, COVID has helped you realize how much you love them, how much you miss them. It could be the Wednesday night at your bar that has become so ingrained as part of your routine where sometimes you found yourself having pre-COVID, you like, it's Wednesday and you're like, God damn it, I'm dreading this. I don't want to go. I don't feel like it today. And now, well, you don't even have that choice. Yeah. And then you realize, how much did I take for granted? Now we're going to go back, super back to this conversation a little bit.
Okay.
Mindfulness and turning your phone off, turning the news, knowing that it's still out there. And then remember the 3 different levels of consciousness, right? What if the good news, what if we don't need to compartmentalize as much as we've been talking? What if the counter is around us all the time, but we're just not very mindful to it? We just take it for granted, no different than we took our Wednesday nights.
Yeah, that's a reality.
So COVID happens, right?
Yes.
We're locked in, with the exception of starting this podcast, and there's not been too many social gatherings.
Correct.
You know, like this conversation's rare. What if I was to tell you that spending a lot of time in nice weather hanging out on my patio, there's a woman that lives in this neighborhood who every day around the same time walks her dogs. This woman is, I've never said hi. And because generally speaking, it's late at night and I don't want to just be yelling at some random woman late at night who's walking her dogs.
Right.
Anyhow, so this woman is walking with her dogs. One of them is, you could tell the dog's younger.
Okay.
She's always pushing one of those like dog strollers.
Yes.
And at first I'm like, why are you pushing an empty dog stroller while walking a dog? And again, all the dogs are really dressed up in like the color stuff around like their leash.
Oh, yeah.
And their collar, so you can see them because it's at night. And every day I'm like, all right, you're walking the same one dog and pushing the stroller. And then one day, I'm still sitting outside, and I see that she's walking 2 dogs, but one of them's really old. And the dog walks very slow, almost with a limp. Every day at the same time, Sabrina. This woman walks those dogs.
Yes.
And to the point where she knows that the dog needs to use the bathroom, but also it's nice to be outside, right? Every day walks those dogs.
Yes.
I've so far have not actually missed it, unless I just missed it. But if I'm sitting outside around that same time, she is there like clockwork.
Yes.
I thought to myself, I've never seen this woman walking with someone else. I don't know if she's married. I don't know if she's single. But I did make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
I assumed that she has raised those dogs since day one. I've assumed that she got to see the one that's limping and that's really old. She got to see him as a puppy, or her as a puppy, or whatever. She got to see the dog as a puppy. And that dog has been a part of her life for that long. And the dog's literally on its last leg. It got me super emotional. Made me feel really bad. And I thought to myself, shit, what am I going to do the one day where she's only walking one dog without the stroller? This woman might not even know that I'm watching, and this might sound kind of creepy, but it's just my mindfulness, right? I'm just paying attention to my own surroundings. It's my neighborhood. I made a decision. Like, you know what? On that day, it is COVID, so I can't just run up to her. I'll figure out the most appropriate way to just say, like, hi, excuse me, just wanted to say hello. And then I was going to share this with her, of telling her, since moving into this house, I've seen this. And I see the last couple of times you've not been walking the older dog. And I just want to check in and say, are you okay? Mm-hmm. And if you ever need to talk, maybe we could go on a socially distant walk together.
Right.
To me, I'll leave the news on. This is a choice. Mm-hmm. Is that mindfulness you're talking about that's in your subconscious? Mm-hmm. For an example, how did you get here today?
Walked.
Did you see trees?
Yes.
How many?
I don't know.
Right. Mm-hmm. Did you see deer?
No.
Did you see rabbits?
Not that I know of.
Squirrels?
Definitely.
How often do you think you've walked in this direction?
Oh, I've lost count.
Right. How many tree beds have you noticed? Has anything stuck out to you?
No, usually the houses when there's something different on the porches or...
When it's something different.
Yeah.
And that goes back to the first, second, third, fourth, and now this. Mm-hmm. We are so conditioned that our consciousness has picked up on the same stimuli over and over and over.
Right.
That we no longer appreciate it. Mm-hmm. And it becomes where we need something like George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, a Trump. Yeah. We need extremes now to make us feel something, when the cure is all around you all the time. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
I do. I do on a deep level. And I think it comes from maybe our societal view or what have you, that it's always seeking out more and seeking out something new. Yes, you're right. It is part of the conditioning that whatever is in front of us loses more and more value because there's no novelty there. Yeah. And that we lose appreciation for it because we feel like there's nothing to learn about this thing that I've seen a million times.
Right.
Yeah.
I think we can change that. Mm-hmm. I think a young woman like yourself who's seen those 20 plus clients a week.
Yeah.
Who is still to this day learning her own identity.
Yes.
And evolving with every single session you may have, with every single new story that comes out. I think it's moments like that, and you're the one that brought it up. You're the one that really and I think it's so important, is that mindfulness piece of being aware of everything. It's not just the bad. Yeah. It doesn't always have to be the negative. Mm-hmm. Sometimes taking a second to realize that, yeah, I was just walking this direction yesterday, but I didn't stop and notice that this tree has these berries that I don't know. Mm-hmm. Hey, maybe instead of using my phone just for Twitter and Instagram and God knows what else, maybe there's an app or something that can help me understand, what are these berries? Mm-hmm. Are they edible? Are they dangerous? Mm-hmm. What eats them? Because whatever eats them, clearly, if it's a bird or if it's a whatever animal, I assume that animal's around here, and I wonder if I've seen it. Mm-hmm. That curiosity.
Yes.
I think it can help us negotiate that compartmentalization.
That's an interesting way to view it. I never would have seen it from that way, per se. I think for me, it was like, oh, how can I implement this in my day-to-day practice? But that's a way to do it. I've just not seen it from that view.
There's no right or wrong, right?
No, right. Of course not. It's just a different perspective. And I think even in that, in what we're talking about, that's something maybe that we're lacking as a whole, as a society, is a lack of appreciation of someone else's perspective. In that it may be different from yours and it may be the same, but nevertheless, it's a perspective.
Yeah. I'll be shunned for this, I guess, but I actually have several Trump supporter friends. Mm-hmm. They're awesome people.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong about being a Trump supporter. There's nothing wrong with being a Republican.
Correct.
I think it's sad that we've gotten to a place where the second that you say I'm an affiliated or I affiliate myself with this person, immediately you're cast out. Mm-hmm. I think that's shit. Mm-hmm. That's garbage time, you know? Mm-hmm. I don't agree with them on everything.
Right.
They don't agree with me on everything. Mm-hmm. We definitely found common ground, and that's why, we're friends. Mm-hmm. But I know one thing, because of the nature of curiosity, empathy, as you said, I've just made the decision. I'm going to learn from them with no expectations that they're going to do the same for me. Mm-hmm. They do not owe me that.
Right.
I'm not asking that. Mm-hmm. I know what I know, Like, if they want to know what I know, they'll ask. Mm-hmm. But if they don't, that's fine. I'll just keep prodding and asking, like, hey, when you talk about this, why do you bring it up that way?
Right.
And I've realized, similar to what you said, at the very start of this, sometimes it's something that we were exposed to when we were younger.
Yes.
And it creeps up into our world, whether it be you rented a video and realized that, wow, they don't have any subtitles in Russian.
Right.
And next thing you know, that's the focus of your entire career path, to having adverse childhood experiences and maybe adverse interactions with a system that is social work to become part of the change.
Yeah.
And immerse yourself in representing something positive for those people. Yeah. I think we all have our own motives. And I think it's really cool that you seem to be really working towards like a path of like shedding more light. Hopefully not a flickering one.
Yeah, that was weird.
Onto your own story. That's awesome.
One day at a time. I try not to put too much pressure on myself either in that regard. I don't want to be the poster person about this field or my experience as an Afro-Latina, as a Puerto Rican, as a New Yorican, whatever people want to label me as. It's more so, this is something that I'm learning along the way at where I'm at right now in life. 10 years from now, it may just be different. I may perceive all these experiences differently, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
Because we're ever evolving, in my mind, ideally.